Imagine being dragged through iron doors, the torch-lit corridor echoing with the cries of the condemned. For women imprisoned in medieval Europe, this wasn't legend. It was the brutal beginning of incarceration. The moment a woman crossed into a medieval prison, known as a jail in England or a geôle in France, her identity was stripped away, often literally. One of the first recorded steps in several European prisons was the shaving of her head. This wasn't merely hygienic, it was symbolic. Hair tied to dignity and femininity, removed as an act of degradation and submission. Next came the shackles. Women, guilty or merely accused, were often bound in iron restraints. In 13th century England, records describe women held in bilboes, iron leg restraints, or chained directly to prison walls. These prisons weren't built for justice. Most were extensions of castles or monasteries, cold, damp stone chambers where women were thrown among thieves and the condemned. The concept of separate facilities for female inmates was rare before the 15th century. Let them be confined and abased, wrote Ulrich Tengler in 1509, describing female punishment not as correction, but humiliation. The purpose was not correction. It was humiliation and isolation. These initial steps, shaving, shackling, public exposure, marked more than incarceration. They marked the stripping of personhood, the descent into systemic psychological and physical degradation. For women in the medieval world, prison was not just captivity. It was the first step in being erased. Starvation cells, the forgotten corner of the dungeon. Not all medieval punishments came with whips or racks. Some worked slowly and silently, and were no less brutal. In the shadowed recesses of prisons lay hunger chambers, where women met death without trial. Small, windowless enclosures, no larger than a coffin, became silent tombs of starvation. In France, the oubliette, the forgotten place, swallowed the condemned whole. Women were lowered through trapdoors, never to return. Some oubliettes were carved directly into castle rock foundations. Once the door closed above them, few ever saw daylight again. Starvation wasn't always declared. It was a tool of control. Records describe women kept without bread or water for days. Without sanitation, food, or warmth, bodies deteriorated rapidly. Death came from dehydration, malnutrition, or slow infection. But for some, the psychological torture came first, screams echoing for days before silence. Their deaths were undocumented, their names erased. The starvation cell wasn't just punishment, it was erasure, a space where women were neither executed nor freed, merely left to vanish. And in that silence, the system achieved its most chilling effect. It taught other women to fear not only guilt, but accusation. For the women who entered these dark enclosures, punishment wasn't declared. It was simply endured. Forgotten by law and by history, they died unnamed, their suffering absorbed by the cold stone around them. Branded for sin, punishment for immorality, behind bars. In medieval Europe, the concept of crime was deeply entwined with religion and morality. For women, the label of sin could bring brutal punishment even without proof. Accusations of adultery or other immoral behavior could unleash the full force of law. Once convicted, many bore their sentence for life, permanently marked on their bodies. Branding as corporal punishment was legally sanctioned across Europe by the late medieval period. In England, branding extended to women accused of vice crimes. They could be branded with a letter permanently marked on their flesh. Earlier records mention women punished for living without governance. Branding was less frequent than whipping or pillorying, but equally cruel in symbolism. In Scotland, repeat offenders could be marked with iron under royal decree. At Bridewell Palace Prison, women charged with prostitution were regularly whipped and shamed. Some were branded, their punishment recorded as moral correction. Jurists wrote, The correction of sin is visible to all, that others may fear. Branding wasn't universal, but when inflicted, it erased social status. A marked woman could never return to ordinary life. Her flesh spoke for her. Branding became a tool of permanent moral condemnation. For women labeled immoral, it meant living as a walking symbol of disgrace. By design. Witch trials behind bars, torture before the verdict. Before any flames were lit, many accused endured imprisonment and torture. These tortures weren't punishments, they were methods to extract confession. By the late 15th century, witchcraft accusations surged under religious hysteria. It was argued that women, by their nature, were more prone to witchcraft. Torture was officially permitted if suspicion was strong enough. In many regions, devices like the strappado and thumbscrews were used freely. These were applied while the accused was still legally presumed innocent. Confessions weren't just extracted, they were expected. Many women were forced to name others, fueling further arrests. Entire female communities were destroyed by accusations born under torture. In Würzburg, over 150 women perished after forced confessions. The prison cell became a chamber of prejudgment. Torture wasn't a sentence. It was a method to shape the story authorities wanted. Fear and doctrine turned justice into ritual humiliation and slow death. These cruelties toward women reshaped laws and reinforced patriarchal power. Centuries later, echoes of those prisons linger wherever morality is weaponized. Every stone of those walls absorbed voices that history chose to forget. Each cell became both tomb and testimony. From shaved heads to iron chains, their punishment was ritualized degradation. To be accused was to be condemned long, before any verdict. Their silence became part of the system, a language of fear. Each scream that once echoed there was meant to instruct obedience. The cruelty was not chaos, it was policy. Every act of pain carried paperwork, a seal, and divine approval. And behind it all stood the belief that women must suffer to be purified. Even mercy became another form of control. Those who survived bore invisible scars etched deeper than any brand. Their endurance turned silent horror into legacy. Through centuries, their suffering whispered warnings to power. It revealed how easily justice bends to fear, and how systems built on faith can turn faith into chains. Each decree written in the name of virtue silenced another voice. But not all stories stayed buried beneath those walls. Some records survived, letters, testimonies, fragments of resistance. They spoke not of guilt, but of endurance and faith. Their words outlived their captors, and in that endurance lies the truest defiance. Their suffering became history's hidden scripture. Each act of cruelty recorded in stone became warning and memorial. History remembers the laws, but rarely the faces. Those faces deserve light again. To remember them is to defy the silence that buried them. Their pain turned into echoes that shaped compassion, and their courage remains the quiet foundation of freedom. They remind us that justice without mercy becomes tyranny, that power, once unchecked, always finds a weaker body to bear its weight, and that even in darkness, endurance is its own form of rebellion. Because every act of survival is a victory over erasure.